What's up guys, Asian here again, and today we're going to be going over the Murkmire PTS patch notes. That's right, they've come out, and there's been a lot of hubbub, a lot of discussion on Reddit, on the official forum, on the various discords that I'm a part of, about the changes that are in these patch notes. So there's a lot of balance changes. This has kind of been advertised as a balance change between all the different classes and things like that. So it'll be exciting to see kind of how the meta changes in response to this patch. Now, just like all the other kind of PTS analysis videos that I've done, I will start off by saying this is only the first round of patch notes. So everything in here is still subject to change. However, I do think that the overall general picture of what we're seeing is not going to be changing all that much, if at all. So as we go through these patch notes a little bit more, I'll kind of point out what I think isn't going to change, what is going to change, and how I think everything's going to be affected in terms of PvE, DPS, tanking, and healing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I will not be covering the PvP stuff just because I am not a PvPer by heart. I avidly avoid PvP. There are definitely a lot of changes in Cyrodiil in this patch, but if you guys are interested in the PvP changes, I would recommend going to look at a more PvP-centric ESO YouTuber or ESO Twitch streamer to get their feedback on what these Cyrodiil changes mean for open world as well as BGs. So this is just a table of contents. Moving on here. So these are the new features, updates, and sort of big changes. So we do have the new zone, Murkmire. So this is kind of in the deep recesses of Blackmarsh. So this is kind of a Argonian themed. So it will have its own quest. It will have its own zone. And they said it's about the same size as Clockwork City. So that's about the size of the DLC that you can expect to get with Murkmire. Now with Murkmire, they are introducing a new 4-player arena, so very similar to Dragonstar Arena in Craglorn. So kind of the lore behind it is that there was a potentate that basically wanted a dungeon to house his, political opponents and things like that. So he had this kind of arena built up, and so you're able to now basically go back and kill the descendants of these original prisoners. So there's going to be a normal and vet mode. There are going to be new arena weapons, so they function very similarly to the Maelstrom Master weapons. They buff certain skills when you use them. The list will be found down below. And of course there will be skins, titles, unique stuff that you can get for completing it in certain fashions. I'm sure there's like achievements and things like that. This is a 5 rounds with 5 stages, so basically half as long as DSA. And they will have they will have kind of very VMA-esque glyphs, or I guess buffs you can say. One of the ones that they gave us was there's a glyph that lets you resurrect everybody in the party all at once. There might be some other ones in there. If it's anything like VMA, we'll also see 3 other kind of power glyphs or something like that in there. And of course there is a leaderboards because it is an arena. So these are the new sets that are from Murkmire. So they have 12 new sets, so 3 dropped, 3 crafted, and then 6 from the Black Rose Prison. So the dropped sets: Bright Throat's Boast. This is the light armor set. It gives you max magicka regen. When you have a drink buff active, increases your max magicka and your magicka regen. So this is basically a magicka version of Bone Pirates. So not very exciting overall. It's basically a slightly weaker version of, let's say, Necropotence. So I don't really see this being used all too much. Deadwater Skull is the medium armor set. Weapon damage, max health, max stamina. When an enemy dies within 2 seconds of being damaged by you, you gain 5 ultimate. Not going to be very useful, again, for PvE, especially for boss fights, because obviously things aren't dying in boss fights unless there are ads. And plus the amount of ultimate that you gain is pretty small and paltry compared to other things. You might want to hold on to a set like this, maybe for like grinding in Skyreach if you're like CP 160 trying to get up to max CP. But other than that, I don't really see this being too useful. Heavy armor set is weapon damage, max stam, and you gain minor heroism at all times while you're in combat, generating 1 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. Now there's already a heavy armor set that's very similar to this. It's called Shulk Exoskeleton. So this is basically the 5-piece exactly the same with Shulk Exoskeleton. So this isn't really anything new. The new thing is the weapon damage, max stam. So this might be useful for like PvP or something like that, but generally speaking, this is not going to be very useful for tanks or anything like that. It's not even going to be useful for like Asylum, the tank healer, just because it's weapon damage, stam versus Shulk's. I believe it's health, physical resist, and something else there. I think healing received, I think. So overall, not a very useful set here, Champion of the Hist. Now you have the crafted sets here. So Gravestake Collector gives you Magicka, Stam, and Health. Enemies you've damaged have a 10% chance to drop a Gravestake for 6 seconds after they've died. Touching the Gravestake restores stamina and Magicka, and only one Gravestake can appear at a time. So this is very similar to Essence Thief from White Gold Tower, except it's craftable. So overall, it's not going to be very useful. Sure, the sustain isn't bad, and if you're like in a tank in a trash pool, you might want to like use this to get some sustain. But it's so easy to sustain on a tank with deep thoughts and balance. I don't see this really being used at all. Naga Shaman, healing taken, healing done. Max Magicka, when you cast a damage shield ability, you gain minor mending and minor vitality for 6 seconds. And the Spectral Cloak once every 6 seconds. Again, this is more of a healing oriented set, so damage shield ability would be something like Igneous Shield, Fragmented Shields, Healing Ward, and it's you gain minor mending, minor vitality. So not very strong. If you're a Templar, you already have native source of minor mending. If you're a Warden, you already have a source of major mending. So overall, this is not very useful in terms of PvE content. Maybe for PvP, maybe useful, but again, if you're healing on a Templar, you already have a ready available source of minor mending, so it's not really that useful. Final set is Might of the Lost Legion. You have max stamp, max magicka, weapon damage, and spell damage, and then after successfully blocking, you gain 3 uses of Empower, increasing the damage of your next 3 light attacks by 40%. This is clearly more suitable for hybrid builds, but in PvE, hybrid builds are not very strong, so this set is again one of those sets that you're not going to be seeing used in PvE. Maybe for PvP, but it's reliant on you successfully blocking, which I just don't see that. I just don't see this being useful overall in PvP. So again, another wasted set in my opinion. Now for the Black Rose Prison sets. So there are normal, and then there are perfect versions of these weapons. So this is very similar to kind of Asylum. I'm guessing they haven't really released how you're going to get the perfect version, but I'm assuming it's if you complete it on vet, you will get the perfect version. If you don't, you will get the normal version. Or there might be some other weird thing that they haven't quite shared with us just yet. So the difference between the perfected and the imperfect version is that the perfected version has an additional set bonus involved in here. So you can see here, this is the two-handed radial uppercut. So uppercut deals 50% of its damage to enemies near your primary target. And then the perfect version adds some physical penetration, while the actual unique damage effect that doesn't change at all. So the perfect version just adds in that second additional piece here. So the uppercuts, so this is two-hander, deals 50% of its damage to enemies near your primary target. Nice for splash damage. It might be useful for PvP, kind of an anti-Zerg tool. Gallant Charge is going to be the sword and shield. Reduces the cost of shield charge by 25% and reduces the cost of your next non-shield charge one-handed shield ability by 100%. Basically, it just reduces the cost down to 0. And then the perfect gives you spell and physical resist. You don't use shield charge at all in PvE. You use it maybe for 1 or 2 fights, and that's basically it. So this is another set that's not really going to be all too useful. Maybe for like a tank in PvP that just like wants to troll people and just shield charge across the field, but again, not very useful. Another wasted set here. Spectral Cloak, this is the dual wield. So Blade Cloak gives you major protection for 3 seconds, reducing your damage taken by 30%. The perfect version gives you stam regen. Overall, again, not very useful. Blade Cloak is kind of being phased out a little bit in the very end game. Still useful for non-end gamers, but you're basically giving up a 5-piece effect for major protection. Not very useful for PvE. For PvP, again, the duration is so short that it's not really going to matter too much in PvP, the major protection for 3 seconds. You could kind of try to time it to kind of avoid getting hit by like a bomber or something, but that involves kind of anticipation, and again, you're giving up a 5-piece set to wear this, or you're giving up monster set if you want to maintain you do 5-piece sets. So overall, not very useful here. Razor Shot, this is the bow. Scatter Shot applies a bleed after delay that deals 40% of your initial attack every 2 seconds for 4 seconds. This duration increases if you are further away from your target to a maximum of 12 seconds, and the perfect version gives you weapon crit. So this is a little bit interesting. I think it'll be more useful for PvP compared to PvE, because you don't really use Scatter Shot in PvE. But for PvP, this might be useful to kind of put a little bit more pressure on enemies, especially if you're defending a keep, just because bleeds kind of ignore resistances. So I can see this being useful in PvP, but I'm not sure if it'll necessarily replace things like the Master's Bow or something in PvP at all. I don't really PvP it that much, so again, you might want to check out a PvP-oriented streamer or YouTuber to kind of see what their take is on this this set here. Wild Impulse, this is the Destruction Staff, reduces the cost of Impulse by 10%, and it places a lingering elemental damage on your targets, dealing 33 Flame Shock and Ice damage over 9 seconds. So Impulse, the deferred version adds spell penetration. Again, Impulse, not a very strong ability to begin with. Reducing the cost doesn't really make it any more viable, and that extra damage here, basically dealing 11, 4 ones repeating each second over 9 seconds. So it only adds an additional 1k DPS to the DPS, native DPS of Impulse, which is already pretty low. So this isn't really going to change anything. Again, a completely wasted set here. Mender's Ward, Steadfast Wards applies Major Vitality to your target for 3 seconds, increasing the healing taken on your target by 30%, and it gives you magical regen with the perfect version. Now this might have some applications in both PvP and PvE depending on the content that you're running. For example, Cloud Rest. This might be useful for Major Vitality because it doesn't seem like there's a cooldown, so as long as you are spamming Steadfast Ward, it seems like you'll be able to basically maintain 100% uptime on Major Vitality on whoever happens to get the shield. So it could be useful there. But with the release of Jailers to Nasty, it's a little bit easier to maintain Major Vitality as your tanks, especially if you're also combining that with Major Vitality potions. So while I do see niche uses for it in PvE, overall I don't think it's going to be replacing the Master or the Asylum's Resto staff at all. And for PvP, you're using Steadfast Ward very often, and with the changes to damage shields that are coming up, I can see this being fairly useful for healers in PvP. For that Major Vitality, it's just kind of an extra buff there when you use your Steadfast Ward or Ward ally. There's new cosmetics, new collectibles, that's to be expected. So there are a couple of weird plants here. I'm not sure what these are. These might just be us telling us about environmental hazards in Murkmire or something like that. New furnishings, new achievements. So now this is the introduction to PvP stuff. So basically they're just letting you destroy the gates and bridges in Cyrodiil now. So you can kind of create choke points and things like that. So that'll be interesting to kind of see how that affects open world PvP. Again, check out a PvP streamer or YouTuber to kind of see what their take on it is. They've introduced 6 new sets with rewards for the worthy. So these are the item boxes that you get whenever you get 25k AP. So you have Indomitable Fury. So Max Magicka Stam Regen, and after breaking free, gain minor protection, minor heroism for 7 seconds. So not very useful in PvE. Again, I'm taking a look at this from a PvE perspective here. Spell Strategist, Max Magicka spell damage. When you deal damage with a light attack, you place a mark over your target for 5 seconds, granting you 500 spell damage against your marked target. This effect can occur once every 4 seconds. So this is clearly a contender for best in slot for magic DPS. Now, I've already seen some testing done on Toxic Raiding environment, and it seems like it's a very similar bug to Reliquin, where only one person will be able to have this active at all times. If you have 2 people wearing this, then it'll actually only count the buff for the person who applied it. So it does. We're not sure if this is a bug, if this is intended or not. I do think this is going to get nerfed because it's basically 100% up, almost 100% uptime on a 500 additional spell damage. So combine this with Sororia, and you got yourself a freaking truck with spell damage. So I'm anticipating a nerf to this, maybe drop it down like 300 or 400, or make it only affect player characters. But I don't think it'll go into the game as is, but you never know. So it's, you don't know what they're going to do. Battlefield Acrobat, Stam Regen, Max Stam, reduces the cost of all your abilities by 6%. Pretty much a version of, I forget what it's called, I think it's Potentates that reduces cost of abilities. Soldier of Anguish, weapon damage, weapon crit, weapon damage. When you deal damage with a melee attack, you have a 25% chance to traumatize your enemy, negating their next 5,500 points of healing for 4 seconds. This is very clearly more of a PvP-oriented set, so this really has no use in PvE. Steadfast Hero, Physical Resist, Spell Resist, Max Health. When you cleanse a negative effect from yourself or an ally, gain major protection for 5 seconds, reducing your damage taken by 30%. This effect can occur once every 10 seconds. So this might be useful in PvE, very, very niche, very similar to kind of the new Black Rose Resto staff. So overall, I don't really see this being used too much. I wouldn't waste time in farming it, but it is something that might have some very, very niche uses in progression stuff, in fights where you have to cleanse yourself fairly often. Finally, Battalion Defender, max health, max stamina, healing done. Ask for successfully blocking, heal yourself or nearby group member with the lowest health for 2k. This effect can occur every 1 second. So this is nice for more selfish builds to kind of make sure you're always healed up. So it's a 2k heal for you or somebody nearby. So it's nice to have that heal there. But it's definitely a selfish set. So I don't see this replacing anything like Eben or Alkosh or Plague Doctor or anything like that anytime soon. I personally think Jailers is still going to be better. That Major Vitality buff is going to give you more than this measly 2k heal every time you successfully block. There's PvP collectibles. You can reorder your characters on the character select screen, so that's kind of a nice quality of life. Made some improvements to housing. They added some more crafting motifs. They have a couple of improvements to ESO Plus that are coming in November, so be on the lookout for that. I think there's a news post about this already. Something about the new kind of how they're doing holiday drops. So whenever you do in-game events now, you get event tickets, and then you can trade them in for some different types of things. So there is a Indrik mount, so you need to collect 4 types of Indrik feathers, and then you can get the Indrik mount. So it does seem like they're kind of making a new way of collecting kind of holiday items. CP cap is increased 30 points, so it's now 810 instead of 780. Of course, everything's been adjusted, and then they've kind of changed the Mac stuff. So if you are been playing as a Mac, they've kind of changed the minimum specs required down to this. I ain't a Mac user, so I have no idea what all this stuff is. I know that's the operating system, but that's pretty much it. So templates here. So they did give you your Murkmire template, pretty much your typical template here, and they have all the new items on it. Then they have a kind of low-level template. So if you kind of want to test things out on a low-level character, you can just make a low-level Murkmire template instead. There are some known issues right now, so none of them are really going to be all that important in terms of testing stuff. These are all fixes to DLC, so Clockwork City, Dark Brotherhood, Horns of the Reach, Morrowind, so not too much being fixed here. As you can tell, there's like dot items here and there. Somersets here, the only thing that's really gonna be affected here, no, there's not really that much actually. They didn't make any changes to Cloud Rest. Thieves Guild, Wolf Hunter, so they did make a couple of changes to Smart Sacrifices I can see here. So I think they probably nerfed a couple of things here. No, they just made a couple of changes here and there. Nothing actually got nerfed or anything. And now combat and gameplay. So this is the real meat of the PTS patch notes here. So they updated how dodge rolling and projectiles work. So now projectiles can be evaded if dodge roll occurs within 1 second prior to their impact. Now they updated how damage shields work. So they kind of wanted to introduce what they called counterplay for damage shields in PvP. So this is how they managed to kind of update that. So now you can crit on damage shields. So that's nice. You're basically able to crit on them. So even this affects PvE shields as well. So like Zamaja, or not Zamaja, Zazhasha, the first boss in Maw, you can now crit on that damage shield. So expect those fights to go by a lot faster now. And now your physical and spell resistance also reduces incoming damage before it is applied to your damage shield. So damage shields inherently right now on live have 0 resistances. So they're not affected by resistances at all. But now your physical and spell resistance will now reduce that damage. So if you're a tank, your damage shield just got a lot beefier because now your physical and spell resistance will reduce that damage that you take before it is applied to your damage shield. So that kind of changes the damage equation a little bit. So I'll probably do a video just to kind of see what happens, because previously it was you basically had your base damage. So let's say it was like a 100k hit, and you took out all of the damage done dealt modifiers, so things like minor maim, minor protection, any of your CPs, those got all reduced from that, and then your damage shield took whatever was left of that, and then you took your block, your damage mitigation from resistances and all that stuff was tacked on after that value. So you basically changed it, so now your physical resistance reduces incoming damage up front instead. So I'm not sure if this is going to be like it's counted twice, once for the damage shield part and then once again after the damage shield has been eaten away, or if they just changed where physical resistance is shifted in the equation. So I'll probably just assume both and kind of take a look at the differences there. And now poison and weapon enchants can proc on damage shields. So previously they can't, now they can. They fixed a couple of issues with poison and weapon damage enchants here. So This is the big change for PvE. When dual wielding, casting weapon ability can proc now either ability, either enchant I should say. Previously it would only proc the main hand enchant, but now it can also proc the offhand enchant, so that would be useful. They removed the 100 penetration from all characters, so very minor change there. Then they fixed a couple of issues here. Now buffs and debuffs, they did change. They changed a lot of these. So minor and major evasion will no longer give you a chance to dodge. That dodging is basically completely out of the game now. Passive dodging, I should say. Now it's all about active dodging. You now have to dodge roll everything, or you have to use a set like His Spark or something. And you now major and minor evasion now reduces the damage you take from area of effective attacks by 5% and 25% for minor and major respectively. So everything's going to be converted to this new effect, and then Blade Cloak will give you major evasion instead of having that unique 25% mitigation there. So that's how they're changing evasion. So basically passive chance to dodge is completely out of the game, more or less. Minor Brutality, Minor Prophecy, Minor Savagery, and Minor Sorcery, they all got buffs. So Minor Brutality and Minor Sorcery are now 10% bonus to damage, and Minor Prophecy and Minor Savagery was increased to 6% instead. So a lot of the classes have different sources of this, so DKs can provide Minor Brutality, Sorcerers can provide Minor Prophecy, Nightblades can provide Minor Savagery, and Templars can provide Minor Sorcery. So now the idea behind these buffs is now that they buff them, you kind of want to have one of each class in your raid group. So that's kind of the rationale behind this change. Now for Dragonknight Changes, do keep note here that they did want you to read through everything before you provided feedback. A lot of people have knee-jerk reactions. So they decreased the range of Lava Whip to 5 meters from 8 meters. Not a huge change for PvE, bigger change for PvP. They moved the stun from Power Lash, and then from Power Lash, it's no longer free. It costs half the amount of a regular Flame Lash. So this is the Flame Lash morph. You basically nerf this for PvE. Not a big deal. A lot of mag DKs were either running Ellie Weapon or Molten Whip anyways, so not a big deal for PvE. Just more of a change for PvP. Warden Ruin no longer increases the damage of poison AoE abilities by 3 to 6%, and now reduces the cost of stamina cost of poison abilities by 12 to 25%. So this would be things like Noxious Breath, Venomous Claws, and Poison Injection. So a little bit of an increase to your sustain with the loss of some damage here. Draconic Power, they just fixed an issue with Dragon Leap. Elder Dragon is a passive ability that now increases the range of all instant cast melee abilities by 1 meter per rank, in addition to giving you the health regen for each draconic ability slotted. So they just basically tacked on a little bit of additional range to Elder Dragon passive here. So this actually will make it so that your whip, I believe, is now 7 meters instead of 8 meters, so it kind of undoes that nerf a little bit there. They changed the Hardened Armor morph, so it increased the duration of the damage shield to 6 seconds from 2.5 seconds. If you're running Balance, there's still no reason to run Hardened Armor, but if you're using Deep Thoughts, then you might want to take Hardened Armor instead of Volatile Armor if you are running Volatile Armor for whatever reason. For Earth and Heart, Ash Cloud increased the healing done by approximately 50%. Cinder Storm increased the healing done by 60%, and then Eruption, they increased the initial damage done by 15% and the damage over time by 70%. So big nerf for mag DKs here with the Eruption change, and also huge buff due to the Eruption change, and another buff for mag DK healers with the Cinder Storm changes. They fixed an issue with Igneous Weapons, and Obsidian Shield, it decreased the strength of the damage shield to 9% of our max health from 10%. So if you had, let's say, 40k health instead of a 4k shield, you would say get only 9% of that, so 3.6k. Not a huge difference there. So still a nerf, but it's a very small nerf overall, considering it's only a 1% difference. So under Nightblades, they increased the cost of Assassin's Blade and its morph by 30%, so that is Impale and Killer's Blade. They increased the cost by 30%. That's a pretty big nerf right there. They decreased the duration of the detection effect for Piercing Mark to 5 seconds, down from 30 seconds, so this is the big change for PvP. Grim Focus, this is the bow proc ability. So fully charged heavy attack now grants 2 stacks. The bow proc is not free anymore, now costs half the amount of a regular Grim Focus, or whatever morph you choose. So this is, again, a huge nerf, or not a huge nerf, but it's a pretty substantial nerf to Mag and Stam, Nightblade, Sustain. So it's interesting to see how this is. I've already seen a couple of parses, and you can clearly tell the Sustain has taken a hit on Magnite Blades. I'm going to obviously be doing my own parses, but just from what I've seen, this is a pretty hefty nerf between the Assassin's Blade and the Grim Focus changes. It's a pretty big nerf overall. Under the Shadow, Consuming Darkness, they just fixed an issue with this. Path of Darkness, they changed the skill, so the base ability no longer deals damage, it just grants Major Expedition to you and allies for up to 2 seconds after leaving the path. Twisting Path does damage, so it's still exactly the same, so Twisting Path hasn't changed at all. Refreshing Path also hasn't changed at all, so it's only the base morph of Path of Darkness that's changed. So Refreshing Path doesn't do damage anymore on top of the healing, it just does healing. So if you're using Refreshing Path and, for example, Cloud Rest to do damage and heal at the same time, you're only going to be able to get the heal, not the damage anymore. Under Siphoning, they increase the damage done by Power Extraction by 25%. Under Siphoning, Strikes have fully charged heavy attacks now restore twice the amount of health and resources. And then Strife, so this is the base morph of Funnel Health / Swallow Soul. You would reduce the damage done by this ability by half, but it also heals 50% of the damage done, and it can target you or an ally. So the total healing amount doesn't change, they just reduce the damage by Strife by half. Swallow Soul doubles the damage, but decreases the heal to 35% damage done, and it can only heal yourself. They removed Minor Vitality. Funnel Health will now always heal you as well as somebody else, so now you basically heal 2 people here. So basically Funnel Health has got its damage cut in half. Swallow Soul still has the exact same level of damage, just decreased the heal and took away Minor Vitality. So most Magnite Blades are already running Ellie Weapon anyways, but for Cloud Rest, this is a nerf to Cloud Rest DPS on a Magnite Blade, because a lot of Magnite Blades would use Funnel Health to kind of heal themselves, combined with Refreshing Path in the Portal phase, and the Portal in the Shadow Realm. So this is kind of a nerf there. For Sorks, Crystal Frags, they removed the channel time associated with frags, so now it's just instant cast instead. Dark Exchange, the ability and Morph now restore half the resources immediately and the other half over 20 seconds. Total resources restored has been increased by about 2%. Health restored remains unchanged. Dark Deal just also has a cost reduction bonus as its morph effect here. So they just basically changed Dark Exchange so that you receive half right away, and then the other half is a kind of like heal over time effect over 20 seconds. So a little bit of a nerf to the very least Stam, Sork, light attack builds who rely on Dark Deal. Rune Prison, this is for more PvP, obviously, so now they stun the target after 1.2 seconds. The initial application can't be dodged, but if the target is dodging after 1.2 seconds, they can avoid the stun. They did increase the duration of the stun to compensate, so it's now 3 seconds instead of 2 seconds. And then Rune Cage, they increase the damage done if you don't break free from it by 22%. Under Daedric Summoning, this is still on Sorks. They increased the block mitigation from Bound Armor to 36%. Conjured Ward, this ability now has a 1-second cast time. So your damage shield as a Sork now has a cast time associated with it. Big, huge nerf to PvP and PvE as well. So now you have to wait 1 second until you can get your shield. They did increase the duration of the shield to 9 seconds, up from the 6 seconds, and powered is now 14, up from 9, so it's a 50% increase in duration. But that 1 second cast time is huge. It's really long. I've seen videos and GIFs. It's a really long cast time, so this really sucks for PvP and PvE. Daedric Prey, they reduced the cost of the morph by 20%. They decreased the cost of the ability of your pet by 15% for the Unstable Familiar, 33% for the Clan Fear, 15% for the Winged Tormentor. Under Storm Calling, they just fixed a couple of issues with Mage's Wrath. Overload, they completely redone Overload. So you don't get a third ability bar anymore when you toggle Overload. You can now use weapon abilities while you're in Overload. You can't generate ultimate while this is toggled. You toggle it once you have 25 ultimate. And now light and heavy attacks on Overload are off the global cooldown, and you can weave abilities when you light attack. They decrease the damage of the light attack by 50% as a result, and then they increase the damage of the heavy attack by 60%. So Daedric Spear, Piercing Javelin, the Binding Javelin morph now knocks enemies down instead of knocking them back. Puncturing Strikes, so this is jabs and sweeps. They increase the damage dealt to the closest target only by 8% for this ability and all its morphs. And now, when you channel the ability, it'll always orient to the direction of the reticule, so you can kind of spin around and strike multiple things now. Radial Sweep, this is the ultimate. Empowering Sweep deals physical damage and now grants major protection for 6 seconds, plus 1 second for each target hit, so a base of 7 if you hit one enemy. Crescent Sweep now deals magic damage instead of physical damage. So this is kind of a buff for magic Templars and kind of a nerf for stamina Templars, because now you basically have to swap morphs. So yeah, there's that. Spear Shards, they increase the damage done by this ability of Luminous Shards by 67%. Blazing Spear got a 60% buff instead. So this is a pretty hefty buff to your shards. So Templars got a really nice buff here. Spear Roll now grants minor protection for 1.5 to 3 seconds after activating Daedric Spear ability. And then Sun Shield, they just fixed an issue with Sun Shield. Dawn's Wrath, they increased the cost of Backlash by 5%, so this is Power of the Light and Purifying Light. Radiant Destruction, they decreased the channel time to 1.8 seconds, down from 2.8 seconds. Accordingly, damage done has been decreased by 15% and cost by 35%. But this, they say the total damage per second and cost per second should stay about the same. But it's mostly that decrease in channel time, so that basically lets us weave in more light attacks, gets us more weapon enchant procs on our front bar while we are using J-Beam. So this is, I consider this a small buff. Restoring Light, Repentance, now everybody can repent the same corpse. It's no longer one repentance per corpse, so this is a very nice buff to Templars. And Rune Focus, they just decrease the cost to match Channel Focus Morph. And then Restoring Focus, which is the other morph of Channel Focus, now costs Stam and gives you Stam to you every second. It doesn't give you minor vitality or minor protection anymore. So this is a huge sustain boost to Stamina Templars. So really, really nice to see that they are giving some Templars some love here. Templars in general got a really heavy buff this patch, so I would be surprised if Templars don't become 1 or 2 in terms of Magicka DPS now. So I'll have to do some more testing on the PTS, obviously, but it does seem like Templars are coming out. They're no longer a meme. They are legitimate. Might be one of the strongest Mag DPS now in this coming patch. For Wardens, they increased the advanced species bonus to 3% from 2%, so they just added 1%. And that can make a difference because usually you have 2 or 3 abilities, so instead of 6 you get 9%, so that's it's effectively a 50% buff. Battalion Defender, they increased the amount of resources restored by 60%, which is huge. This is a really, really nice buff to our sustain. Cutting Dive reduces the cost. They reduced the cost of Cutting Dive, which is the Stam Morph. Then the Magical Morph, Dream Cliff Racer, you don't have a minimum range requirement to get that 15% damage done bonus. Now every meter you're away adds 1% damage done up to 15, so you don't have to be a certain distance away now. You can be 1 meter away and you still get a little bit of extra damage done, so this is a small buff overall. Falcon Swiftness, so now the unique buffs that they gave you, so Bird of Prey gave you minor Berserk, Deceptive Predator gave you minor Evasion. They are now passive buffs, so as long as you have it slotted, you will get these abilities here, these buffs here. So I can see Bird of Prey being pretty much slotted on Magicka, and Stamina Wardens on the front bar pretty much the whole time here, instead of, let's say, the Betty Natch or the Natch instead. Feral Guardian, they decreased the damage done by the bear summoned by this ability and its morphs by 30%, so they nerfed the passive ability. I think it's just a passive damage. I have to double check with the actual ultimate damage, but if it is definitely a nerf here for bear damage. They reduced the cost of Scorch and its morph by 25%, and they increased the cost of Swarm and its morph by 30%. So this might make Scorch actually viable for Stam and Magicka Wardens. So it's basically Warden's got a really nice sustain buff and a little bit of a damage buff as well. Green Balance, the minor toughness buff now applies even if the target is completely overhealed, and they basically double the duration to 20 seconds from 10 seconds. So this is really a huge buff for Warden healers. Nature's Grasp can now target the bear. Winter's Embrace, the Arctic Blast morph of Arctic Wind now fires a projectile that stuns the target in addition to healing you. And it does require an enemy target in order to cast. So this is kind of a minor change. I think this will be more for PvP than PvE. And then you just change the visuals on Impaling Shards, so it actually represents things. Blade Cloak, they changed it, so now the major evasion thing is there. For the bow, Acid Spray, they just fixed a issue with the morph. Scattershot, they increased the range to 28 meters from 10 meters. So again, combine this with the bow from Black Rose, and you might have a viable PvP option here for some heavy bleed pressure. Then Destruction Staff, they increased the damage done by Impulse in its morph by 25%. Still not really going to be worth using, I don't think, even with the new morph. So Light Armor Annulments also has a cast time now, so they increased the duration of damage heal by 50%, but they added in a 1-second cast time. So this is how they're basically counterplaying shields, so it's going to be harder to stack shields because you have that additional cast time associated with it, and you can actually be interrupted during this cast time too. So if you get Crushing Shock while you're trying to cast your shield, you're interrupted. Evocation, so this ability now increases your magic regen by 2 to 4% per light armor worn, and it also decreases the cost of magic abilities by 1 to 2% per piece of light armor worn. Then Recovery actually was part of, they moved this passive over to Evocation, and they renamed this to Grace, and now it reduces the effectiveness of snares applied to you by 1 to 4% per piece of light armor, and reduces the cost of sprint by 1 to 3% per piece of light armor worn. Basically, it is basically a light armor version of the medium armor passive with the same effects here. They increased the weapon damage bonus from agility to 7 to 15%, up from 6 to 12%. So you're able to get a little bit more weapon damage now, stam DPS. So Devourer, different werewolves can now devour the same corpse, so very similar to the Repentance change. You can now have all your resistances as a werewolf. So then they just changed a couple things with transformation. They fixed some issues here with Silver Leash. Sigic Order, they decreased the cost of Imbue Weapon and Crushing Weapon by 5%, but they increased the cost of Ellie Weapon by 10%. So now I think Ellie Weapon costs pretty similar to Force Pulse. So now, in terms of spammable, you can basically choose between Force Pulse or Elemental Weapon now. So I don't know why they felt the need to increase the cost, but they did. And they fixed an issue with the Undaunted skill line. Alliance War, so Reach, the passive, now only affects abilities with a range of 28 meters instead of 15. And Warhorn no longer grants minor toughness, so now the only source of minor toughness is basically going to be from Wardens, the Maturation passive, or from the Warrior Poet set. Now under the Enchantment system, Spell Precision and Precise Strikes, these are two passives under the Apprentice and the Ritual respectively. They decreased the crit strike chance from 12% down to 9%, and that's because minor sorcery and minor savagery have gotten a 3% increase to the amount of crit they provide, so that's just kind of to offset that. Fixing issue with Befoul. They decreased the effectiveness of potions that increase magic and stamp cost to 10% cost increase, down from 30%. So cost poisons might not be worth running anymore in PvP. The Absorb Stam enchant now deals physical rather than magic damage, and they have fixed the bug with Crusher and Weakening. Previously, weaker Crusher will actually basically refresh the current Crusher uptime. So let's say you had 2108 Crusher and you had a Torx Infused Crusher. Torx Crusher would actually refresh the 2108 Crusher uptime rather than applying the 2740 Crusher. But now the Torx Crusher will apply correctly, and same thing with Weakening here. They fixed a couple of issues with different sets here. Nothing that is really all that important overall. They did fix Olorime, where synergies were incorrectly proccing the set, so if your kiting healer was wearing Olorime in Cloud Rest, sending the spears down shouldn't proc it anymore. Let's see, a couple of other fixes here. So Powerful Assault, so they fixed an issue with a proc this item set would only apply to group members, not just any ally. Not a real big change here. It was a small buff to Mob Inferno. They basically fixed the damage area, so it was actually smaller than the actual visual effect area, so that's just a small buff here. So again, these changes aren't really all that important here. And then these are all pretty much Alliance War changes. Again, I'm not going to go over these because I'm not a PvPer. Art and Animation, World Bosses, Crafting. So they did fix the Artaeum Takeaway Broth, so it is a food rather than a drink now, so it should work with Green Pact passive, and it will not work with Bone Pirates anymore. So they did fix that bug with Artaeum Takeaway Broth, and everything else here is pretty much just some fixes here and there between issues, and not really anything that really affects PvE or anything like that. So overall, this patch has quite a few balance changes that came in. Mag Nightblade's got a pretty hefty sustain nerf, so it'll be interesting to see how they stack up compared to sustain on other classes. Unfortunately, this is kind of what I was expecting. They said they were going to make changes so that sustain was equivalent across, or similar enough to across all different classes, but we specifically told class reps to tell them that nerfing Nightblade sustain is not the way to go. It is to buff the sustain of other classes. And you can see here, the only class that really got any sort of sustain, a big sustain buff, was Wardens. Stam Templars got a nice kind of buff with the changes to rune focus, but Sorks were untouched, DKs were untouched, and they just nerfed Nightblade sustain. So that's not the right way to go. At least I don't think it's the right way to go. A lot of us were saying, buff the other classes, don't nerf. Nerfing is not necessarily the correct thing to do here. So Mag Nightblade's got a nerf. Templar's got a humongous buff. Magplars and Stamplars got a pretty nice buff. DK's got a nice buff. Warden's got a pretty decent buff as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Mag DK stack up to their stamina melee counterparts. And then it's also be interesting to see how Magplars stack up against now Mag Sorks, as well as Mag Nightblades with these buffs and changes to their tool sets. So I will be doing a lot of testing on the PTS just to kind of see how it all stacks up. Hopefully I'll be able to do a live stream either tomorrow or Wednesday night. Probably Wednesday night because I am raiding on Tuesday night. I'm leading a raid, a training run for Hellfighter Minion on Tuesday night. So that's kind of what it seems like right now. It seems like Magicka Nightblades might not be the top dog anymore when it comes to Magicka DPS. But in terms of Stam and DPS, it seems like Stam Nightblades are still going to be, probably going to be the king. Stamplar's got a nice buff, so you'll see them moving up on the pecking order. And then of course we have to kind of see whether the Eruption changes and the changes to DKs made Mag DKs competitive with Stam and DPS. So that's it for this video. I know it was very, very long, but these patch notes are very, very dense, and this is a huge patch notes change. It's a huge balance change overall for PvE and PvP, so I did want to cover this entirely. So hopefully you guys found this video informative. There will be timestamps in the description below. I'll try to kind of go through them and try to pinpoint a couple of key points and kind of put them in the description, you know, where I go over certain things. But hopefully you guys manage to sit through all 45-ish minutes of this video. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.